Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How's everybody?
Fantastic.
Good. Hope everybody had a good week off. Got plenty of things done, or rest, or work, or whatever. All right. Got an email here. All right. Good evening, everybody. Hope everybody is well. Let's see what all this is going on my phone. Let me turn it down so we can get some work done. Welcome. This is MELS 603. It is Wednesday, July 14th. This is your 2-week notice on your last case study. Will be due at our last class in 2 weeks. We'll talk about it more next week. Tonight we have case study 3. We are normal 2. Let's look, share screen. Let's look at where we are in terms of our, let me move this out of the way, of our weekly schedule. As you can see, we're at our ninth of 11 meetings, our 11 weeks, our 8th meeting this summer. We do case study 3 next week. We will look at liability and field trips, and we'll kind of put everything together. And then our last one will be our inclusion model case study, which will encompass pretty much everything, touch everything that we've worked on this summer. So be prepared for that. This is your 2-week notice. I'll talk more about it next week. The other thing that I wanted to cover quickly before we get into our case study presentations tonight is some of you are starting to work on the SKIP. A couple reminders. In SKIP task 1, prompt 1, you have to develop long and short-term goals as a result of your needs assessment on communication. Please remember, short-term goals are things like handbooks or phone trees or actual social media, those kinds of things. Once you have established communication, your long-term goals are to then use that to have parent academic nights of some sort, college fairs, family reading night, family math night, family scholarship night, financial aid, where you, now that you're communicating better with your constituents, with your stakeholders, you now utilize that to bring them in and communicate with them and do more with them. Kind of the notion of help us help you help your child kind of thing. That the problem with most of our parent academic events is that they're not well attended, because people say, well, I didn't know, or didn't. You weren't communicating with them on a regular basis. The notion here is to now utilize that better communication through an activity that you want to run with your parents. That's the difference between short and long-term goals. Starting something and checking on it later is just still that same short-term goal. It's not. We want to then use that where we got better communication to do an academic event at our school. Family math night, family reading night, family scholarship night, family college night, that kind of thing. And then number 2, make sure, the whole notion of number 2 is simply to audit the school leadership section of the teacher working condition survey. It's not about communication. It's, what could we do as administrators better leadership wise for any part of the school operations that's covered under teacher working condition survey. This will also inform our school improvement plan. So make sure that you understand those. Short-term, long-term. Short-term is communication things. Long-term is having an event. Make sure that under prompt 2 that you understand you are doing an audit of teacher working condition survey school leadership section. And if you do that, you'll be golden. Some of you are already working on that, doing a good job. Excellent job and doing well. Those of you who have not concluded your OMA, that's where we are on the weekly schedule. You should be wrapping that up this week, as you can see from our weekly schedule. OMA final evidence narrative should be ready for task stream this week. This is your 2-week notice. You got to get that in as well. So any questions you have on the SKIP, remember. Let me get out of that. Please remember that our Blackboard shell under discussion boards or under If you go to discussion board, you will see that I have set up boxes you can for review for your skip. And I also have drop boxes if you want to grade it and move on. We do have those things. So you can get your skip reviewed here, and we have assignment drop box where you can get it graded and move on with it here as well. So for those of you who are working, you can continue right on through the break all the way up to the fall semester. You should put it as your goal to get the skip knocked out this summer. That way, when you come back in the fall, you can knock out the cap so that when you go to your last semester, you won't have both the cap and the SOP to have to do next spring. You'll only have, that way you can kind of pace yourself into one in the fall and one in the spring. We all know, let me stop my share. We all know what an ordeal school's going to be this fall, starting back. And so I would get as much done on this because you're going to be lucky to get one done this fall as busy as you're going to be. And we all know that. And so we don't, the time to worry about getting behind is now for getting everything done on time in the spring. There's a lot for you to do. So if you can get ahead, I would. That's the notion. All right. So tonight, our two resident principals are going to be running things tonight. I'm going to turn the reins over to them. I do keep a book here on the order that we go. So tonight's order should be America's group, then Matthew's group, then Heather's group, then Kitty's group. Because in the past, Heather's group's gone first, and then Matt's group went first. And so tonight, America's group will go first. And then next week, in 2 weeks, then Kitty's group will be the group that goes first for the last weekend. I think that way everybody gets a chance to go in all the different positions and go first. So tonight, we'll kick it off. America's group can share her screen. And again, the comments and the guidance tonight will come from our two residence principals as they move you through this. The only thing that I want to remind you of is this is a case about malpractice. There's three standards: misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance. And you should be able to identify for your two resident principals each of those three, because all three of those are in this case study. Again, misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance. All three of those. Misfeasance, you did the wrong thing, not intentionally, but did the wrong thing. Malfeasance, intentionally did the wrong feasance for the wrong reason. That links back to Heckler's veto. And then nonfeasance, didn't do something when something should have been done. That's the notion here. All right. America's group, share your screen and get started. I will stop my share and stop my video and let you get going.
Okay, Mary's sharing her screen tonight, but I'm going to start our presentation.
Give me 1 second. Sorry, my computer's being slow.
Okay, we are normal too. And the case study was regards to Rip? Thank you. It was in regards to two male students who basically wanted to go to prom together. And a lot of issues started picking up when they started displaying PDA around school from parents and students. So the principal, Mary Lou, she met with them, then she met with them and their parents, and then she met with them a third time. And during her course of meeting with them, the first time she didn't really say too much, but the second time she met with them, she mentioned possible harm by their classmates. And she mentioned to their parents asking them to speak sense and help them understand the danger that I guess that their actions were could potentially cause. So I would take her comment as a veiled threat of not necessarily harm from her, but harm from others. It did mention that she had received phone calls, emails, and messages once it started. There were threats of petitioning by parents and students. So in some of that correspondence that she received, maybe she received threats for the students as well, and she didn't necessarily speak on that, but she was trying to maybe get across that what they were doing, of course, it was not liked by others. And I think that's where that malfeasance came in, where she was, I guess, trying to get a message across, but not necessarily saying it in the way that she should have. Because there was a better way to handle the whole situation. She could have reminded them about if there was something in the policy about it. She never brought up policy. She basically was just, I guess, going off of what was happening, what was going on, what she was trying to avoid. Mary, you can go to the next slide. Yeah.
All right, so her responsibilities under the law. She's responsible for the students' freedom of speech is protected by the Constitution as long as they do not present a clear present danger or threaten a material disruption of the education process. The students really were not threatening the education process or endangering others. They were just others that did not agree with the way that the boys were behaving. She must protect the students' First Amendment to avoid discrimination or violating the rights of these students. The principal needs to communicate the school's policy of freedom of expression and that all students are held to the same standard. So she's not just picking these students out just because of what they're doing. She needs to hold the same policy for all students at her school. She's to follow the school's handbook policy on public displays of affection. So her decisions are not arbitrary or capricious. So if they're not allowed to show PDA, no other students should be allowed to show PDA either on school property or at prom. She must recognize heckler's veto so the student's freedom of speech is not suppressed due to just those offended by the issue. And she needs to protect the rights of all students to ensure all students are treated justly and fairly. In this case, students were treated unfairly just because of like the backlash she was getting from other people. So she really needs to protect all of their rights, especially their First Amendment.
So how should Mary Lee respond to the concerns of Jerry and Cindy Hudson? Mary Lee should listen to what they had to say, but she would also need to remember that her job is to protect all the students and that she would not be at liberty to discuss other matters with their students. So she could just, if they were pressing for more information about what she was going to do about it, she could just simply tell them that there were policies in place and that she would make sure that those policies were being followed.
All right, so for the next part, how can we address or minimize bullying and cyberbullying? One of the first things to do is to make sure that it's in writing. And of course, that goes in our policy handbook or either the conduct handbook. And I even added to it, perhaps having its own page and heading within the book to separate it so that it's clear. Most schools give those documents out at the beginning of the year. So you want to make sure that is specifically addressed, both cyberbullying and bullying. Make certain that parents receive a copy of this and students by making it available on the website. If you have a social media, Facebook page for the school, making sure that it's available there. And of course, paper copies as well. And also encouraging teachers to go over that in their classroom. usually probably around the first of school, to remind students of that. And then not just have the policy in the book, but actually enforce it. When these offenses are made, enforce the policy. If it says that you're going to be suspended for an X number of days or whatever's going to happen, follow through with it. Don't let up on it, because if you let up on it, then you start showing partiality. And that's where you can get into some serious trouble, because this person feels like you weren't fair to them. I also suggested like having some anonymous submission of it, especially if this is new to your school and you've never done it before, where students can feel comfortable in sharing where they're having issues or seeing issues or know of other issues that are related to bullying and cyberbullying. Create a positive and welcoming school climate. Put up signs that encourage unity, that encourage I guess we want to say tolerance, but just to encourage acceptance of everyone. They have all kinds of little posters you can put up, and that just creates an environment where people are constantly reminded of those things, even if you're not physically saying them every day. Then you can do like a bullying and cyberbullying prevention campaign. That's really big right now, and perhaps the school resource officers can assist in bringing in some community efforts and doing some kind of program during the week. I know at my school we did something similar to that one time. Certain day you wear a certain color, it represents, in support of not bullying and all that kind of things. And you can do a week of awareness with various activities that allow students and staff to be reminded of, and even parents to be reminded of, where the school stands on these issues, and involve student services, have the school's counselors to do videos or to offer their services to talk to students who may be dealing with these issues, to process it in a positive way.
Okay, and just to piggyback off of what Ryan just said, Willie and Jimmy, they even went back and met with the principal, and that was one of their suggestions to, try to come together and educate the students on different issues. And she was not so accepting of that either. She just, kind of wanted to push it off for them to wait until after graduation. And this was Kriana's part. Should Mary Lou allow Jimmy and Willie to attend the prom as a couple? Yes. The 14th Amendment provides in part that no state can deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Title IX specifically prohibits sex discrimination. Congress enacted Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, which requires that no person be excluded from participation in, denied the benefits of, or subjected to discrimination on the basis of sex under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. It authorizes any federal agency that provides such assistance to issue regulations to enforce the prohibition. Oh God, sorry. The prohibition of sex discrimination. It also allows termination of financial assistance when an institution does not voluntarily comply. Mary Lou can make sure that Jimmy and Willie follow the school's policy about PDA, but she cannot exclusively tell them that they cannot attend prom. As long as both students are following the dress code, a part of the school's policy, they should be allowed to attend prom. By law, she cannot exclude them. And that is our presentation.
Okay, Dr. Lamb, you just want us to go ahead and just comment? Is that what you'd like us to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I want you, both barrels, give it to them.
Okay. For me, like you did say about your handbook, making sure everything's in the handbook. I personally, for me, I would be very cautious, even with the PDA, even though it's in the handbook. Being in a high school, meaning that it's very difficult to catch. This is just me. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's very hard to catch every single little thing. And I personally, if I had no PDA and I saw something, I of course would do something about it. But it would be very difficult because students would be like, well, you didn't say anything to so and so and so and so that was holding hands, and you're going to. I know that sounds so bad for me to say that, but I'm being very honest. And for things like that, for something, holding hands or something like that. Of course, if you had kids all in the corner, locked all up or something like that. Of course, for me, I would, follow my handbook as to what it said. You made some really good points when you talked about the handbook. For example, the copies being on the website and things like that. That's of course some things that I do as well. You can go to our website and you see it's on their website, and you also see what I also do is do in addition to copies for parents that need them as well. And also some good points about oh shoot, my brain, the class meetings, even in the high school level, making sure you do that and going over some of the things in the handbook so students are aware of what is happening. For me as well, I would follow it up with some things at the prom. I do anything when I go to the prom, students have to sign statements, and they have to sign the packet of knowing how to act, things like that. I did have my first year some issues that's not related to this, but kind of with the prom. It was dress code. And I had students that signed for the dress code. They showed up for the dress code in just half tops, just the bra tops, and that wasn't allowed by our dress code. And I sent many away. And it helps that you have it signed by the parent and you have it signed by the student and things like that. So you have all your ducks in a row for something like that happens. Did you want to add anything, Dr. Maraglia, as well?
Sure. I was actually going to ask you if you had ever experienced a situation similar to this being in a high school and with the prom, because this is I know Dr. Lamb chooses these case studies because they are very real world, and it's very possible that you could have a situation like this. Some of you may have had something like this happen at your school, and you do have to be prepared for something like this because it is your responsibility to protect every student in that building. And it gets very tricky when you start getting into areas of parents and their opinions and even the opinions of other children, and making sure that everyone's rights are being protected. One thing that I noticed in the case study that you just presented, you mentioned about having a way to report bullying. And I don't know if it's gotten to the point where every district requires anonymous reporting.
They
Do you
do.
have that, Dr.?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Because I know that we have that. It can happen through our school website, but then also other avenues as well. And I know we've talked about this before, that if anything is reported, you basically have to drop whatever you're doing at that moment and you have to report. I mean, you have to investigate. At least that's how it is in my district. Any report of bullying takes precedence over anything. And so you've got to make sure that you are responding to that. Again, when we met a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that there's a case going on right now in Charlotte where there are students saying that they reported situations and it was not addressed, or they're saying that it wasn't addressed appropriately. I'm not a judge. I'm not the one saying one way or the other. But again, you have to go back to making sure that you are listening to concerns, that you are addressing concerns, that you're not ignoring it, and that you are trying to handle things in as fair and equitable manner as possible, so that these parents and students can see that. Like Dr. Caton said, I'm sure she wasn't very popular when she sent those young ladies home from prom, because I'm sure moms and dads have spent a lot of money on those dresses, and it's hard to make sure you're addressing everything because you didn't tell them to stop holding hands, but you're telling me. So you've got to present that front of that you are treating everybody the same.
And I would just echo, like, we do have the anonymous tip line. Like you were saying, I think it's text messages and things like that students can send, and it goes automatically to us. Now, when we first instituted that, we have posters all around the school. When we first instituted that, we would have tips and things like that. But I think it was just something new, and because kids would just like do funny things sometimes that were not really appropriate, not legit. And we've not had, but once in a while we'll have something that's really substantial that we need to investigate. And we also, for prom, we ask to tell us who you're taking to the prom. I do have a couple of transgender students at my school. That's not an issue. I've never made it an issue. I also have some couples who are in gay relationships, and that's never been an issue either. I mean, that's just, they tell me that's who they're going to take and that's what they do. And so we've never had any issues like that before. Not at our school.
Excellent. I would offer a couple of tips. One of the best things that I ever did as a high school principal in terms of prom was held prom in the club area of Panther Stadium, downtown Charlotte. They have their own security and they can help you with limiting people from outside and limiting people who are inappropriate or inebriated or those things. The problem that you get into if you go to a hotel ballroom or a place like that is they don't have security, and you either have to hire a bunch of people or you don't have any. The key to me there in a more urban setting is making sure that you're planned and prepared, that you either hire those people or you go to a venue that has those people so that you can enforce the rules that need to be enforced. That was one of the the club area that faced, we used the one that faced if you've been in Panther Stadium, the club area that faces the downtown, the skyscrapers in Charlotte. It's a beautiful view. It's a beautiful venue for a prom. It's one way in, one way out, elevators controlled by security. They let you do a walkthrough around the stadium. They light it up for you. It's a beautiful thing. This was when it first opened, obviously back in the 90s. It was a beautiful thing, but the beautiful part, we did it 2 years. The last 2 years that I was there at the high school, we did it there because of, yes, it was a beautiful venue, but more importantly, it was a very secure venue and I could control things, what was coming and going. Prom is difficult. There's a number of reasons why we did this case. One of them is, this is a relevant topic, but prom is difficult.
Yeah, I also say that for me, I don't allow students who are not my students to attend without me having to check behind, them. Meaning that if there's 6 high schools in my county, so if they want to take a student from another county, I contact that principal or they have to actually have it signed off by that principal that they are eligible to go. There's no discipline issues or anything like that. And of course, I don't allow somebody over the age of 20 to come to the prom and they sign off on all that. In addition, when we have prom, of course, for us, we have multiple, we have, like I said, 6 high schools. So we have a lot of sheriff's deputies and things like that do our security for us. And I also require my teachers to do at least 1 hour of duty at the prom. So they, when they're hired, I say, you have to do graduation, you have to do a graduation celebration, and you have to do prom. That's one of the things you have to do it. And I mean, I'm very, so much so that they sign up for that hour and I'm checking off to make sure they are there at the prom at that time. And I have them stations of where they're supposed to be. So,
yeah, that duty roster, this is part of that supervision schedule. You make these priorities. Prom is a big deal. It can get away from you very easily. And it's a very public, and if you let it get away from you, there becomes serious questions about your leadership. So you got to get on top of prom. Now, in terms of the LGBTQ issue here, let me do a quick rundown for you on the 3 things. Not addressing the public display of affection. I mean, Jimmy and Willie were a little over the top. Well, they were actually a lot over the top, and they weren't hiding it. Dr. Kate was talking about you can't catch everything, but Jimmy and Willie weren't. It wouldn't have been hard to catch Jimmy and Willie. Not addressing that PDA was nonfeasance. You should have done that. The misfeasance I felt was when she initially told them, could they wait to be gay till after school year was over? That was the wrong thing. I don't think she did it for the wrong reason. And then the malfeasance goes, the bail threat, banning them from the prom, talking to other parents about them, violating federal FERPA laws. That's just malfeasance. That's all I can tell you. So this is, this was the hat trick for you hockey fans or for you soccer fans. She did all 3 in this case. And so this one was a pretty easy one. I had somebody ask me a few years ago why we still did this one. And I hate to say this, but this one has become more relevant in the last couple of years than it was maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. I thought we had gone further than we actually have. We're revisiting a lot of this stuff now with the bathroom law and other things going on in North Carolina. I'll date myself here. I was an undergraduate at NC State, but when I would come home, when we would go to Charlotte, you know, one of the clubs, the hottest clubs in town back in the 70s was the Pterodactyl Club. It closed, and then, but the drag race that happened on Saturday night just moved to Mythos Cafe and then Cosmos while they were open. And Dr. Maraglia could probably tell you where it is now. I don't know that once Cosmos closed, I'm guessing that once the pandemic and these places open back up, but everybody knows what a drag race is. You've seen RuPaul's Drag Race on TV. They've had drag races in Charlotte since back in the 70s. It was never an issue. I told you, I was a high school principal in Charlotte. I had a fellow that wore a dress. We had gay and lesbian couples all the time. But somehow we've revisited all that, and not in a good way, I'm afraid. And so we're really going to have to double down on making sure that the rights of everybody are being upheld. Transgender is become a big issue. Gender identification, all of these things. Even Dr. Caton in a more rural area in southern part of Pitt County, got a couple of transgenders and got some gay. It's everywhere. And for some reason, we're trying to turn this ship. You know, we've got a lot of folks who are wanting to go back and revisit these things, and the law is the law. We need to protect all of our kids. And so, good presentation, excellent presentation tonight. We'll move on to the next group, who is Matthew's group.
Okay, everyone can see that, yes?
Yep.
Yes, we can see that.
Wow.
Back. Okay.
All right, so tonight we're going to start off with the questions. So the first question was, would you consider Mary Lou comment a veiled threat? Yes, because students can attend prom with their date no matter who their date is. Also, students cannot be banned from the event because they have sexual orientation. She urged the parents to speak sense to their sons and help them understand the dangers of the kind of by their actions. So for question 2, what are Mary Lou's responsibilities under the law? She is required to enforce the Title IX non-domination mandate. Also, each recipient shall designate at least one employee to coordinate its effects to comply with and carry out its responsibility under this part, including any investigation of any complaint communicated to such recipient alleged is non-compliance with this part or alleging any actions which would prohibit by this part. The recipient shall notify all the students and employees of the name, office address, telephone number of the employees appointed pursuant to this paragraph. She is also required to develop and apply for procedure designed to ensure itself that the operator or sponsor for such other education programs or activities takes no action, efforts affecting any applicant, student, employee of such recipients, which this part will prohibit such recipient from talking and shall not facilitate, require, permit, or consider such participation in such actions occurred. So for question 3, how should Mary Lou respond to the concerns of Jerry and Sydney Hudson? We think that she should tell them that the Title IX of the Education Amendment of 1972, Title IX prohibits discrimination based on sex in school education programs, and activities that receive federal financial assistance. Title IX states no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participating in or be denied from benefits of or the subject to discriminate under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And the last question, should Mary Lou allow Jimmy and Willie to attend the prom as a couple? We feel like, yes, she should, because by law, students cannot be banned from events because of their sexual orientation.
The next one, we're gonna go over just how to minimize bullying and cyberbullying. The number one thing would be the school handbook. You want to make sure that the policy clearly states the rules on bullying and cyberbullying. Make sure that the policy covers all school-wide events. And you want to make sure that it clearly states that there's a strict anti-bullying policy that covers all the events. The next one is a positive school culture, and you want to have a supportive school environment. The next one is parent awareness. You want to make sure that all parents are aware of the policy and all students are aware of it. And then you can have a bullying and cyberbullying prevention at your school. You want to have positive steps to prevent and punish acts of bullying and harassment, and make sure that whatever the policy states as the punishment for any of that is carried through. You want to go by the school board policies on the bullying and cyberbullying, and you want to make parents and students at the beginning of the school year, when they get the policy, the handbook and the policy, make them sign, the parents and the students sign the policy at the beginning of the school year, that they understand the policy and the punishment.
All right, so to address some of the ethical paradigms of this case study, I think really highlighted many of the ethical dilemmas that principals face when dealing with different stakeholders. Ms. Hines was put in a difficult yet relatable situation of trying to balance upholding the rights of students while pleasing parents and the community at large. And so to handle this situation and others like it, decisions have to be made responsibly, which means relying on law, on policy, professional ethics to come to reasonable conclusions. It also requires having recognition that decisions can't be made based on what is most popular, but instead based on what will provide the best outcomes for the school. And so using these four ethical paradigms, we can begin to think about the roles and responsibilities that principals have when making important decisions. So the first one being justice. When we think about justice, principals must exercise fairness and equity when handling both student and parent actions. Disruptive actions of students, in this case, it was PDA from the students, requires that principals take their own action to provide a safe and orderly school environment. And so this needs to be weighed against the rights of individuals as protected under the Bill of Rights. And while multiple courts have given school administrators a lot of latitude when it comes to maintaining a safe school, there still have to be decisions made and must consider the rights and protections of the most important stakeholders at the school, which obviously are the students. In addition, this consideration must extend across all demographic groups. Student discipline data from all across the country has shown that certain groups of students have been suspended more frequently for similar infractions than other groups. And so this particular case referenced a particular demographic group, that being the LGBTQ students. And it's a group of students that has historically and often been marginalized, misunderstood, and treated differently by school leaders. This has been both intentionally and unintentionally. But to combat this, school administrators must recognize and reflect on their own implicit biases to ensure that equal justice is applied to all students, regardless of their demographics. And so this is even more important to consider when we think about the demographic makeup of school administrators all across the country. And a recent statistic from the National Center for Educational Statistics has shown that Most school administrators across our country are from backgrounds that are obviously white and straight and from middle and upper class economic standings. And so that can lead to some disparities in how we think about and take actions against demographic groups that do not fall into these categories. The second main ethical paradigm, again, is the care paradigm. Care is certainly needed, a needed quality of principals when dealing with these types of situations, especially when they involve defiant students and parents, as we saw in this case study. Principals must express care by listening to all concerns of the school community and acknowledge that their issues are ones that need to be addressed. This establishes trust and mutual understanding between all the parties, and it's going to make it easier for decisions to be made and to be implemented when doing so. Care is also established when we build relationships with students and parents, but in the case of students, building those relationships can reduce the number of discipline issues and really prevents small issues from manifesting into larger issues, as I think this one could have possibly been. And we kind of started seeing it in the case study with just a simple PDA action building up into something larger that involved more stakeholders than it probably needed to be. It's also important to note, however, that empathy cannot replace or trump law and policy when it comes to making important decisions. Principals must follow guidance and rulings from state legislatures, courts, boards of education. And in this case, that would include court rulings on student expression and district policy on student conduct. As we know, critique is the third key ethical paradigm here. Having a critical view of problems is important for principals as they need to fully analyze all the relevant perspectives, and there's a lot of them in this case. And so that means having an objective lens in which you're viewing those problems through. And so this can really, again, only be achieved when we strike down our own preconceptions and biases about certain issues, and then we can begin to fully understand the facts behind the issue. And it's particularly critical when handling issues related to LGBTQ students, as I was mentioning earlier, as being ones that are often misunderstood and overlooked, which I think Ms. Hines is certainly guilty of. Having a clear issue of these problems allows principals to then make lawful and evidence-based decisions that will lead to the best outcomes. And lastly, getting to the fourth ethical paradigm, the profession, it's certainly important to have really key professional qualities, and I think this case study brought up a number of them that need to be addressed. One being, if not the most important quality, as we've kind of mentioned already from today's discussion, that school administrators must uphold the rights of all students and teachers that are afforded to them. Principals must also be models of ethical behavior, and that behavior can be reflected back onto students and teachers to model their best behavior as well. And then lastly, I'll say principals must also hold themselves accountable for the decisions they make, and then also be able to recognize when they need to reverse course, and doing so in a graceful manner. That was something I think, unfortunately, was not demonstrated by Ms. Hines in this particular case. And that is our presentation.
All right, I think you brought out some really good points and nice job. I'm enjoying seeing how you guys have progressed through the weeks of our case studies. A couple of things I wanted to point out that you mentioned. One that's really important is the Title I piece that you had in your presentation, and that it is a requirement to have a coordinator, not only within a district, but within a school. And that could be something that falls to you once you move into an administrator role, because that is a requirement. not to harp on what's going on with CMS right now, but it is the current reality. That's one of the things that the district has been criticized for, because back when some of these incidents occurred, CMS did not have a Title IX coordinator. There is one now, and there's supposed to be someone in each building that acts as the Title IX coordinator. So just be aware of that, because again, that could fall to you as you move into administration. I also wanted to, as you were talking, Will, there, and you mentioned the care paradigm, I'd already been thinking about, and I had jotted it down, about the relationships. That's huge in this situation as well, to have a current pulse of your school. If you're out talking to kids, getting to know them, this situation could be something that the parents could be upset about, but the kids are okay with it. And or it could be everybody's got an issue with it. But if you have a pulse of your school, if you're out there talking to your kids, you're going to know that they have a problem with a situation like this, and you're going to kind of know where to focus your efforts. Not to say that you would not follow the law and protect the students, but it just gives you a better idea of what's going on in your building and know where your problems are coming from. And I like how you were really reinforcing the matter of following the law. I like your statement about don't let empathy get in the way. If you are always following the law, and you can use that as you address these situations with parents, you may not ever be able to change someone's mind about what they feel about a couple like this. But if you could at least educate them about the law and what you have to follow as a school principal and what you are going to follow, then you're going to be in the right. And you're also going to be protecting kids, which again, it always boils down to protecting the students. So I thought that was a really nice job.
I also wanted to say about the reverse the course. I myself, as a principal, did a suspension one time, and the more I looked into it and did even more investigation, I felt that I had not made the right decision. And to, like you said, reverse the course, go back to that parent and, talk to them. And I mean, I did. I mean, I said, hey, I really made a mistake. I didn't do what should have been done. And they appreciate that more, that even when you call them and say, hey, this is the decision, I didn't make a good decision. And they appreciate that. Also, just go back, if you will, to I know that Matthew, you talked about on the second slide. I just, if you will, your group, not just you, Matthew, just break that down in terminology, like just summarize that, because that's a lot of verbiage there. But what does that mean? What does it really mean? What was her responsibilities of the law? Because you gave, I guess, this whole paragraph and all this verbiage, but what does that really mean in layman's term for that? Anybody in your group can ask or answer.
I guess for the most part, it was just the breakdown that she just had to make sure that she followed the law that was stated for this particular reason. That was her guideline. That was something that she just needed to go by first, to just cover herself and just cover the students and just cover their well-being.
But Dr. Caton, was your point, yes, what exactly is the law? What does that mean? When she follows the law, what does that mean she has to do specifically, but in terms that you can understand?
Because I mean, one was,
I'm sorry. One was what I mentioned was having that Title IX coordinator, but in those two paragraphs, what does that mean for you guys starting out? If we just went and handed this to you and said, okay, this is what you got to do, you're going to look at this and you're going to be like, okay, what do I do? So putting it in terms that you really can wrap your head around it. Would that be it? What you're saying, Dr. Caton?
That's right. You verbalize so much better than I do sometimes.
We just play off each other.
If that was I don't know if that was a rhetorical question or one that was wanting a response, but I think it really just, what I think about that and what those paragraphs are saying is what y'all have mentioned throughout the semester about just designating duties, that there has to be a designation of this responsibility of understanding the language of Title IX. That designation, as you said, might be left to an assistant principal. And so it's that responsibility of that assistant principal to understand the language of Title IX, what protections are given, what rights are given in that law. And that needs to be upheld by that administrator across all students.
And you might be that administrator.
And a lot, my point is that a lot of times you can get lost in all the verbiage. So when you read that, you know exactly what it's asking you to do and what you're supposed to do. Because sometimes, I know for me, for example, if you give me a long email, chances are I'm going to read it like 6 or 7 times. And, I'm going to read it once, skim over it, and then I'm going to go back to it because I'm just not going to do it. So when I get policies and things like that, I'm going to skim over it the first couple of times and I'm not going to know exactly what it's going to, and then I'm going to have to go back to it, reread it, things like that. So I get lost a lot of times in a lot of verbiage. There's a lot of things that come across my desk. So what I'm saying to you is just know what that is asking of you. When you can give me a whole long statement of something, but just know, what does it exactly mean? What do you have to do? What is the results of that policy or that law? Great.
I think an excellent job tonight. One of the things that, in wrapping up this presentation, one of the things we've got to remember, certain laws and policies, require us to actively do things. Sometimes they ask us to do things. Sometimes laws and policies just tell us how conditions should be, and we just have to observe those conditions and we don't have to do anything actively. Title IX requires us to actively do some things to ensure that equal protection under the law. You can't just say, I'm the Title IX coordinator, I've read it, I know what it says, we're good. No, you actually have to go out and do some things. Some law, due process requires you to do some things. Due process law and policy requires you to be an active participant, to be active and not passive. Title IX is the same way, and that's what we're talking about here. When you read that and somebody says, all right, Will, you're our Title IX coordinator. You're the new AP. You got bus duty. You've got book duty. You've got bus duty.
Discipline.
You've got discipline. You've got everything that nobody else wants to do, and you're the Title IX coordinator. When you read that, you must have a takeaway. Oh, I've got to go and now actively do this. Some laws require you to actually be active and do things. And that's what the folks at Myers Park are getting beat up on right now in Charlotte is they didn't actively go out and follow the law. They just read it and said, okay, we're good. They didn't put anything of this in place. They didn't actively fulfill their legal responsibility under Title IX. And that's what they're being hit with right now. We'll move on to the next one. One of the things that caught my ear in that presentation was pleasing parents. Ooh, that's a tough one. And we'll close out with, I'm going to have both of our resident experts address the notion of, as a principle, of pleasing parents.
Well, what I would say about that is, of course, it's always a balancing act. But again, you have to follow the law. And if you are following the law and you are responding from a factual standpoint, that even if they get angry with you, they don't have a leg to stand on because you are following the law. And I promise you, you are going to have time and time again, you're going to be hit with certain things. And it's going to seem like it's an easy thing to do to just give them what they want. But once you do, then that's it's never ending. Then it's going to be expected for you to do that all the time. So as you self-reflect, one of the things you should ask yourself going into this is, are you going to be able to handle that? Or do you typically like to keep things non-confrontational? Because it's going to happen. And I know that I can speak absolutely from my experience that I had to grow a bit more of a backbone when I became a principal. And I made a lot of people unhappy when, you know, when they wanted a particular classroom, or they wanted this, or they wanted that. But you still, if you're coming at them from the law, you're in the right. And they're going to have to just move on.
I will also, echo what Dr. Marengo was saying, is that parents, when they know that you are very consistent with policies and procedures, law and things like that, it makes it a lot easier for you. And they appreciate that because it's looked at as being fair and consistent and equitable, and that's what they want. They might not be happy, but they do want to see the fairness and consistency. And when you're sticking to the policies and you're sticking to the procedures and you're sticking to the laws, then that's what it is. And you might not make somebody happy, just like she said.
But you also might see less of them coming to you for every little thing, because they know, they've seen, okay, she's not going to do that for me because that's not how she operates. And it may be that you get to the point where you don't see as much of it.
That's
But
right.
once you give in, you're done.
Yep. Right.
Excellent. When you get your first job, there's going to be a line out your door of people coming to see you.
Oh, yes.
And that's going to be the time that you're going to be tested. Everybody that's wanted things for years and been told no are going to come because you're new and hope you don't know. But if you'll follow law and policy, you'll be about better off. And the notion that we want to collaborate with our stakeholders, but the notion of pleasing parents, that becomes a never-ending story, I'm afraid. Once you start, it's hard to stop. Not to be a contrarian, but that's one of those things you have to be very, very careful with.
Well, pleasing parents is not collaborating with stakeholders.
Right.
It's a completely different thing.
That is correct. But we often mistake that as
Right.
collaboration.
And they certainly do. They certainly do.
They think that's what it is. And they're not the enemy. We're not saying that they're not the enemy, but they're not responsible. If you break the law and because they wanted you to, they don't know you. I mean, that's on you. You should have told me no. They won't have any empathy or sympathy for you, unfortunately.
And they are there just for their child, where you have to worry about everybody in your building.
That is correct. They're there to be their child's advocate. So you have to remember that. You have to have a different perspective than they do. You're there for all children. All right, Heather's group is next.
I think Cyrus is going to share and start us off.
Excellent.
Okay, so I know that some of this we've already discussed, but as far as considering her comments a veiled threat, we didn't take them to be quite as much of a threat. We looked at it more as if she's receiving a bunch of emails, threats from parents, and especially whenever some of the language that those parents are using is very derogatory, hate speech. There is very much a concern about the safety of the students in this case.
So let me time out you right there. All right. Regardless of what parents do, and that's what we were just talking about, regardless of what they do, we have a professional standard on our part. And what we're talking about here, and that's why I said I've written this down. I knew we were going to get to this one because I'd seen y'all's presentation, is the notion of heckler's veto. Under the standard of heckler's veto, her comments because she simply passed on what the parents said to her, they became threats. They're a little more than veiled threats. The notion here as a person responsible, as the administrator in charge, you can't pass those threats on to those children or to their parents. That is a threat. These parents, their threats weren't veiled at all. But if you pass them on, that's heckler's veto. And what heckler's veto is where you abridge or amend or deny the rights of the victim based on what the perpetrator may do to them. You have to stop that. If you participate in that, you have broken the law. That is heckler's veto, and that is a threat. That is a violation of the law. And so, yes, you could be concerned, but the way you express that concern is to say to the people making the threats, if you follow through with any of the threats, we will put the full weight of the law on you, not on them. The law is they're on the side of the angels. The law is on their side. If you do any of these things, if you follow through, let me inform you of what we will do in response to what you have done. That is where you don't take those threats and say to the students and the parents, then if you come to the prom together or you continue to do this, they're going to beat you up, or they're going to do this, or they're going to do that. No, you can't participate in that. That puts you in a tough spot. But again, if you follow the law, that's what we're talking about. You can't let what you feel or the notion here of I'm just telling you, you have to take a more active role. You can't be passive. When somebody threatens one of your students, you can't be passive and just pass the information along. You must actively say to them, no, I won't allow you to do that. If you do this, I'm not going to punish them. I'm going to punish your child, or I'm going to punish you, or I'm going to call the police on you. So that's the notion of heckler's veto. So under that standard, because she passed those comments along and didn't actively seek to stop the comments, she didn't say back to those people, you can't do that, or I won't allow, or I'll do this. She just said, okay. She just passed their threats along to the students in a little more veiled way. So that this is a classic example of heckler's veto. I'm sorry, go right ahead.
No, thank you. And I will add to that. I think the last group, in thinking about this more, the last group mentioned implicit bias. And I do think that as an administrator, as a teacher, as an educator in general, it is important to take a step back and reflect on, in a situation, in any situation, am I having a certain level of bias here or not? I think that kind of gets to another point that is down here, that because this is such a contentious issue, having higher ups informed of what's happening, because this is something that this issue has escalated very quickly, keeping her superintendent informed that this has happened. And that way she has someone to bounce all of this off of, but also in case it does escalate, they aren't caught off guard by it. I thought that was a good point that the last group mentioned that I wanted to reiterate. Her responsibilities under the law, again, some of those were just mentioned, but she is responsible for maintaining a safe, orderly school. All students have First and 14th Amendment rights, including Willie and Jimmy. We also thought that because this is such a contentious legal issue, or could escalate even further, having her local board attorney or consulting her board attorney about this issue would be something just to maybe help clarify some of the, even though she should know the law, if she has a question, going to the board attorney to help her make sure she is in the right would be a good step. Drew, think you had the next one?
Yeah, I do. So one thing one thing I deal with every day with athletics and all that, and parents always get into the playing time situation The one thing I think Mary Lou should have done from the beginning is hear the parents out, but more importantly, just discuss the parent's child with them, not the other two students or anything like that, but really hammer on the point of what does this have to do with your child? Let's talk about your child and your child only, since at the end of the day, we have to worry about your child and the safety of all the kids. Well, what is this doing to your child? And let's get off the fact of talking about them. But more importantly, I think at the end of the day, it's getting your district involved, because with these conversations as a principal, you're going to have to deal with them. But to a point, it's if the parents don't like how it's being handled or anything like that, they're gonna bounce it to the school. They're gonna bounce it to the district office, to the school board, anything like that. So it's really just keeping yourself in check and making sure everybody of the upper powers know what's going on within your school and everything like that, so they're not caught off guard and then they're coming back on your head like, why didn't you tell us about this or anything like that.
This one's mine. So for this, should Mary Lou allow Jimmy and Willie to attend the prom as a couple? I think everybody's kind of went over this and discussed every piece of this. The only thing that I would add to this part is that my school, we have students who go as partners or groups of people or even as pairs, whether it's same sex or opposite. So I feel like even if in this situation, if you were to single them out, that would create even more of an issue because then you would have to, I was looking at it from our perspective, from our school, we'd have to explain why we were letting, because we let a bunch of the guys attend prom together, like they ride together, and even girls like that don't have dates. They get a girlfriend because they don't have somebody taking them to the prom. And so then you would have to address, well, why are they allowed to take each other, but yet just because we're a couple, we can't. So I said that, for us, there's no way we could do that, because then it would be a tricky issue. Even if you're sitting there trying to somehow justify it when it's not okay, it's just not okay. And then, so as principal, this bottom part, Mary Lou should ensure all teachers discuss the prom rules. We felt like was important because sometimes students don't understand what's acceptable and not acceptable behavior. Like for us, we don't allow, no matter who you are, regardless, any kind of public displays of affection in the hallways, or too much so even at prom, because then that leads to other situations, and situations that we don't want to be responsible for right there as a school. So because we've had kids before who have texted each other in class and said, meet me in the bathroom. We just knocked that out to where we discuss the rules, the expectations. That way, if something's inappropriate, they know where they crossed the line, and making those very clear to both students and parents in the very beginning can eliminate some of those problematic issues that might arise later.
Okay, and I have the last slide, which is about the bullying and the cyberbullying and how that should be addressed. So first of all, that there needs to be a strategy to make sure everyone's being educated just about what bullying and cyberbullying actually is. One of the ways that can be done is, I think, to really stress the importance of understanding the difference between teasing and bullying. I think often teasing can be interpreted as bullying, or vice versa. I think it's important that students and staff need to understand that bullying is when you're stripping power from your target, and really educating students on what that means. Another thing that would be a suggestion is involving your students as much as possible in trying to create change with that education. So creating like a student leadership team, and making sure that student leadership team represents the diversity of your student body. So if you do have students in your school that are, transgender or gay, or however they identify, that you have representatives from each of those diverse groups that are in your student body, so that then the student body as a whole can say, we are represented, not one individual group of students, and then feel like they're even more targeted in a way. I think that could just bring and unify a student body by doing that. And then potentially that could lead to, removing those labels that do separate your students. And all that goes into education. The second thing that, could be done is providing professional development for your staff and just better educating them even more. That could include those anonymous tip lines like the Say Something app. Again, helping them to remove those labels out of their classroom. One thing that has not been mentioned, I think is important, is as staff, you should know the hot spots of your school. Where are the areas in your school that are prime locations for bullying to occur, prime locations for the PDA to be hidden, and try to implement some sort of plan to make sure teachers are posted in those locations during class changes, before school, after school, to try to minimize the occurrences of incidences that take place in those locations. And that should be pertinent, that is a part of the security plan of the school. Another thing with the staff that could be part of professional development would be making sure they understand how to build the rapport with all students, and doing that through communication, but understanding that the communication is not just verbal communication, that your nonverbal language, so to speak, is just as important as well. Are you addressing the students that don't always speak, maybe sit in the back of the class, try to avoid everybody? If you are trying to include all at all times, then you're more likely to decrease chances of bullying just by simply having that open line of communication, or anything further happening that could be detrimental to all the students. And I can't remember if it was somebody in our class or at some point, somewhere in one of these classes, someone mentioned that they like to print photos of the students and post them up during the teacher work days, and have teachers go through and put stickers or something on the pictures. Who are the students you've made connections with? And then you go back and you pull the photos that nobody put a sticker on. These are the kids that are falling through the cracks, that are being missed, and those are the kids you target that school year. Everybody needs to pick a child or two and try to build a relationship with them. Again, building that rapport and opening those lines of communication to make everybody feel safe and accepted in the building. The third thing would be to just make sure everybody knows the policies, district policies, school policies on all the bullying and cyberbullying rules. Of course, it's going to be hard to have them memorize law or something that's paragraphs of information long. So it's always good to keep things simple, have your rules simple, have them clear, make sure that you are setting those expectations, you're enforcing those rules. And that's not just with a percentage of your staff, that's everybody. Everybody has the same expectations in their classroom, in the hallways, bathroom breaks, whatever it may be. One thing I think that is also important is Dr. Caton mentioned this before, that she doesn't allow phones in school, period. And I know that the principal at my school is the same way. Even at lunch, phones cannot come out. And I know everybody might have their personal opinion on cell phones and why they should or should not be in schools. But if they are put away and students don't have access to them throughout the day, then that could potentially limit and decrease the number of incidences of cyberbullying that occur. If something did happen in the school, they can't quickly access their phone and spread it like wildfire. And maybe by the time they get home, they've already forgotten about it. So that's just something else that could possibly be done. And just to kind of close out, something I had thought about on my own was, if we were all taking this class 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and we had this same case study, I would feel like it would be with an interracial situation, because you had parents 50 years ago that would have been up in arms if their black daughter was going to go to prom with a white male student, or vice versa, or whatever the ethnic racial group is. And so regardless of, I guess, what we're looking at with the case study, whether it was 50 years ago, you had I think it was the Loving, Virginia ruling that took place, a major civil rights decision. And again, it was still the same thing, that they were violating the equal protection and due process with the 14th Amendment. So I just thought that was kind of something to consider, was that this is just a modern day version of that. And who knows 50 years from now what the next case study would look like. And that was it.
Excellent point. Excellent point, Heather. Excellent point.
So I'm not sure if it's this class I said this to, or if it was a previous. They're all kind of meshed together for me. But whenever, just like you said, good point about, you know, contacting the central office. Anything that I know that's going to have a parent call or anything like that, I contact my central office contact. Period. I want them to hear it from me before they hear it from that parent. So I'll immediately do that. If I, you know, and I do have, you know, the school attorney. I've called her. We have a female school attorney, and I call her. Hey, this is what I got going on. What are some of your thoughts? Am I doing this right? You know, don't be afraid to ask. I've been doing this a long time, and I still call and I ask if I need to. But more importantly, I want to make sure they are aware of what the situation is, because I want it to come from me. So.
And along with that, don't ever call without letting your principal know, because the call really needs to come from the principal. Unless your principal is good with you making the call, because there may be a situation that they may say, okay, thank you for letting me know, but you can go ahead and make them aware of that. But do not ever call anybody outside of the building without letting your principal know first. They need to always have the heads up. One thing I wanted to say in reference to the comment about a sad thing and 50 years ago, to me, a sad thing is I could still see the interracial issue being an issue today. I know this case study was more about a different community, but I think in 50 years, unfortunately, we may be still seeing some of the same things happening, because it doesn't seem like our society has made that much progress. Another thing with educating your students and your parents and your staff, I would include in there not just about bullying and cyberbullying, but again, referencing the current case that's going on right now, making sure you educate everyone about Title IX and what their rights are under Title IX and what they can do and how the school is going to respond. Go on and let them know up front. If you have a concern and you share this with anybody in our building, this is what we're going to do. We're going to investigate, we're going to address it, not necessarily what the outcome is going to be, but let them know what avenues are open to them to share their concerns with people in the school building.
Excellent. To follow up on one of the points that Heather brought out, I really liked is know your hot spots. And those are relevant when you're doing your duty roster. That's during the regular school day where your supervision is going to be. And also it should be reflected in your supervision schedule, which is your extracurricular activities, where those hot spots are in that as well. Some school buildings, thankfully, but not all, have ways that you can put those chain gates down, like when you have a basketball game where they can't get to other parts of your building. And if you don't have that, you need to have a plan to be able to supervise your campus during evening or weekend events. But more importantly, your duty roster during the day, know where your hot spots are, track your data, when you're entering your data into PowerSchool, it has a location and you can run a report by location about where your incidents, your disciplinary incidents are occurring. And if you don't know, you ought to know, but if you don't, you can track it through PowerSchool where these things are happening that you need to address. And that's a great point. Now, Cammie's point about groups and grouping and labeling. I'm quite sure that during your childhood or your adult life, you've had either a dog that had a litter of puppies or a cat that had a litter of kittens. And you know how you determine the gender of those is you just have to lift their tail and look. We don't want to get into lifting their tail and look in the school business about what labeling kids and what gender they are. That's another, we're not talking about pets here. And Cammie made a great point. She didn't make it as ugly as I did. She made a great point about you have kids going to prom in same sex, and we don't want to get into trying to figure out what their relationships are or labeling them. And we don't want to identify kids by their labels anyway, but But well, I'm telling you, you talk about a fool's errand trying to figure out, well, these 4 girls are going together. Are they girlfriends or what? No, no lifting their tail to look in our business, folks. We don't want to get into that. We got to avoid that labeling. So that's one of those things that we really, that you don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm gonna tell you right now. So that's one of those things that you need to avoid, is trying to figure out what relationships are when you start talking about groups and of students attending prom or other events. That's unimportant for the purposes of school administration. We protect all kids. That's our job, period. Regardless of whatever label they give themselves or other people give them, doesn't matter. We protect all kids. All right, we're ready for our last group. That'd be Kitty's group.
Okay, so I'm starting us off, and we've definitely been over the key points at this point, that we've got these students that we're seeing display in PDA and they want to go to prom together. The principal tries to deter their actions. Other sets of parents come into the situation with claims that other students outside of the situation are upset and plan on boycott. The parents of Jimmy and Willie support them, and Jimmy and Willie want to bring the light to their situation to the student body, and the principal suggests that they wait until graduation. About considering Mary Lou's comments of veiled threat. I was actually glad when Cyrus started talking a while ago, because I was with him. The other groups were saying yes. And I think I was kind of looking at it through the lens that Cyrus was, where just in general, I didn't look at what Mary Lou was saying as a threat. I understand now, that it was because she was passing off the comments from one set of parents to others. I was looking at it wrong. In my lens anyway. I'm not saying, Cyrus, that you were looking at it wrong, but I was looking at it as that she wasn't threatening to exert consequences on them. And so that's why I didn't look at it as the veiled threat. But I understand now where Dr. Lamb was coming from, that with her passing off those other comments from the other parents, that it did that there. We did have the heckler's veto in this part, where we seemed to be given that greater power, though, because she was passing off those comments from the other parents. She was giving greater power to those who may be offended by the 2 students, instead of really focusing on those 2 students as well as the rest of the student body.
All right, what are Mary Lou's responsibilities under the law? We've already talked a little bit about this. Dr. Caton just talked about this, contacting superiors, board attorney, and public relations, just to give them a heads up. And if you're an AP, your superior would be, you would go to your principal. I know that the administrative team at my school, a lot of times when they have issues that we have a lot of new APs, they will get together and discuss them and, decide what the best course of action is. Create a safe place for everyone to express their views and opinions, make sure all rights are being respected, make sure that all concerns, address all concerns, but make clear that each person has rights and those will be respected. Examine what parts, if any, of the educational space is being disrupted by that situation, and that can lead you. But I know we've said this, each group has said this, all of, Dr. Kate and Dr. Maraglia have said this, as long as you're following the law and you are consistent, there's going to be times where you're going to have issues, you're going to have unhappy parents, they're going to go to the news, they're going to get on social media, but if you have done rights under your policies and laws, then you can't make all the people happy all the time, but that you've done the right thing by your students, no matter what. And then how should Mary Lou respond to the concerns of Jerry and Cindy Hudson? Address their concerns. but make them understand that the rights of the boys to create the club or organize events, go to the prom, whatever, is their right. And then solidify that bullying, hostility, et cetera, will not be allowed on school property. What policies, consequences the school or district has in place for such actions. And that just goes to that you want to make sure that no matter what, as an administrator, you are keeping your students safe and secure, and their learning is not disruptive.
Okay, now we get to the part where should Mary Lou allow Jimmy and Willie to attend the prom as a couple? And yes, we've talked about that. I've seen it several times how a group of girls, group of boys, they go together to the prom. And I thought that was a great example by Dr. Lamb about we don't want to lift any tails to find out, what's what. So we'll just let it be. So it also deals with, you can't deny, gender expression. A court case that ties in with this would be Tinker versus Des Moines, where the young lady wore the black armband, her and a couple of other students, in protest of the Vietnam War. Well, they were suspended. They ended up coming back to school, and wore all black for the rest of the year. And then they ended up filing a court case or suing the school systems because they felt like their rights were being violated. And they won. So, that definitely, the Tinker versus Des Moines deals with the freedom of expression, letting kids express themselves. Mary is also going to need to devise a plan to protect all rights and provide a safe environment for all students, being that if she did allow them to have their club, have their day, or whatever they were doing, she wants to make sure that everybody is in a safe environment. The role of the principal, the legal and ethical concerns. Again, we went to the principal's quick reference guide to pull some stuff to help support what we're talking about. And it says, to ensure that any acts by the school officials to censor student expression are reasonable in the light of form in which the suspect oral communication is expressed. And again, that goes back to, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. The next thing that we found in the reference guide was talking about, educating students on, the use of social media. I think Miss Caton was talking about how, the first week of schools, how she beats the rules into her kids over and over until they understand it. And I think this is something that we should definitely educate our kids on is, the social media aspect of it. I'm the dean of students, and we probably have 2 or 3 girl fights or arguments every week. And it's because so-and-so posted something on social media and don't think that the school can do anything about it, which we do have to get involved. So, educating them on the social media part of it, making sure that we have policies in place that informs the students and the parents of possible consequences for violation of appropriate use of the policies.
All right, and in summary, obviously this is a combination of all three. So we have for the intentional wrongdoing, just banning them from the prom and taking the other parents, talking to the other parents about these students. So that was malfeasance. Misfeasance, just telling them to wait until school to be over to actually be gay. Was really the message that she was sending, which was very wrong.
Yeah, I love that.
And then nonfeasance, just not addressing the PDA, as we've all mentioned. And speech just can't be suppressed just because it attracts attention, because there's so many things that do attract attention in schools, and you just can't discipline for those, especially based on people's sexual preferences. And definitely can't do that if somebody's offended. And lastly, minimize the bullying. Actually, let me back up. If somebody's offended, yes or no, but as long as everyone is safe. Let me add that on to that. And then to minimize that bullying and cyberbullying, knowing the local board policies and the consequences for those, I was informed that our district had to kind of revise the policy last year to actually specifically identify cyberbullying instead of just being under the clause of bullying in general. And cyberbullying is just always ever changing with the social media, kind of like what Larry mentioned. Kids think they can get away with it. And it's definitely crucial for admin to stay up with those policies as they are constantly updated with all of the technology that we have. And definitely clearly communicate all of the policies, all the consequences in multiple different ways to all of the parents and students and the community, and investigate those complaints, take your disciplinary action that's appropriate, and just try to create some school climate that's supportive of all gender, all choices, and try not to violate that freedom of speech or freedom of choice.
So I just want to say one thing. I liked some of the things that y'all said. You talked about a club and things like that. I do want to make sure I say one thing about clubs, and that is having procedures with your clubs that are consistent. For example, that will help you to, I guess, navigate and monitor your clubs. For me, if students want to create a club, they of course have to submit to me their guidelines or their constitution or something like that. But they also have to find a sponsor, and it has to be a staff sponsor who is willing to be on that, to advise and be over that club. So that's another thing. So, not just having a club just for the sake of having a club, but make sure that you have consistent policies and procedures for establishing that club. And that will make sure that you don't have just some willy-nilly things happen within your school.
We have a club approval form that you have to fill out, and it has to be filled out by the president and then your sponsor at our school.
Yeah, it's great.
I just wanted to say, I like how there were so many things we talked about throughout the semester so far that you tied into this presentation, that you did spell out the nonfeasance, malfeasance, misfeasance, and you gave the examples of that. You tied in, again, communicating to the district what's going on. So you always are having some support there. You did mention educating again and empowering your students, not only about the bullying and the cyberbullying, but again, just a reminder, empower them so that they know what their rights are in terms of being able to report and what the follow-up there is going to be, going back to that Title IX, always going right back to that. But there were so many things there that you brought in that we've been talking about the whole time, following the law. And so I just feel like that was just a really nice kind of encapsulation of what we've been doing. And again, I think everybody's done such a nice job as we've come along from the first case study till now. I think you're seeing all the different aspects. And I know it'll be different when this is you on the ground running, but it's still, it's great practice for you, because I guarantee you're going to be facing stuff like this.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Lamb, if I could switch gears a little bit with the competency folio. I've not had very many submissions for that. So please make sure you're getting those to me. I will say for me and Dr. Maraglia, we would like the semester to be up there. So when you submit to us, it says summer 2021, and then put in what the task is, if it's OMA or if it's skip or whatever it's referring to. So that's very important for us. So because we want to make sure that we see all the different tasks within your portfolio. So just a reminder, go ahead and start getting all those to us so we can start looking at those.
Yeah, I had my first one this week and I was excited about that.
Great. Yeah, it's time to start working on those. To kind of close up for the evening here, I am too very pleased with your progression, that you're putting more and more things together as we go this semester. I'm very pleased that Larry brought out about due process, Tinker versus Des Moines. Again, these case studies build a little more each time, which leads us to the one for in 2 weeks. it's going to touch everything we've done. That's the way these case studies build. And you are building and growing as we go. Whether you realize it or not, they're getting more and more complex. But you're making it look easier and easier. That's because you are integrating the things you learn as you go. Now, again, I can't simulate what it's going to be like on the job, but this is as close as we can get. And we've got 2 resident experts here that are telling you how they do it on a daily basis. And hopefully you don't have to remember everything or know, but it will trigger thoughts and process for you as you go. And to kind of close out, Ashley's presentation there at the end, cyberbullying and technology is ever evolving. These cases change, evolve. You've got to stay up. And then the last thing tonight, and I'm going to give both of our resident principals an opportunity since they're in the role and I'm no longer in the role. I'd like for them to address for you the notion, the issue, the concept, the paradigm of public versus private person. That as a school principal, you're never a private person. You can never commiserate with parents or hold your own views or bring those to work with you. You can never not be the principal of Aiden Grifton High School. You're always in that, and that influences your behavior a lot more than you will ever know until you're in the job. But you must understand, you are no longer a private person when you sign on the bottom line to become a principal of a school. You're now a public figure 24/7, and you have to represent that. So I'll without mansplaining any further, I'll take it out for our lady experts.
I'll start if that's okay. And some might disagree with what I'm going to say, but I'm just going to say it. And that's what I do. For me, Facebook. I don't post anything really, except maybe pictures of my family or whatever. I do not post anything about religion. I don't post anything about politics. I don't post about it. It doesn't happen. I'll be very honest with you. I don't allow my husband to. Everybody knows he's my husband. I will even tell you this. I don't allow my son to. He's 25 years old. I don't. And I'll be very honest with you. I've even told my daughter-in-law, be careful. I'm the principal. And I know that sounds so bad, but it's true because people know that. And I don't need to be looked at a certain way because, and I know people may disagree with what I'm saying, but it's just what it is. It's just when you are in that position, it's different. I have seen assistant principals post things. I think it's not correct. I don't think you should be posting politics. I know it's a freedom of speech. However, I just feel it's different when you're in that role. I personally, I have parents hit me up all the time to be a Facebook friend. I don't do that. That's just not what I do. I'm very cautious about what I do in public. I'll be very honest with you. Things that I do in public, I don't within my town. I personally, I'm at a high school and I know people are like, you're an adult. I get that, but there's just things I don't do in the town. I just think it's a respect thing. I mean, I'm held to a different standard. That's just the way I feel.
Yeah. And from a different standpoint, to a degree when I was an assistant principal, but definitely when I became a principal, I had to handle myself differently as a parent. I told my husband that he had, if God forbid there were any discipline issues involving my children, that he needed to be the one to handle it because I didn't ever want it to be seen that I was asking for special treatment. My kids actually went to school with me in elementary school, so I was very, very careful there. I did not want them to ever be seen as being treated differently. But just now, even with them being at other schools, I still try to handle myself in a different manner. I watch what I say in front of parents because not only am I representing my school, but I'm representing my district. And I don't want to, they'll come up and say, okay, well, what's the real story about whatever, or what's going to happen about this? And I don't get into that because you are on 24/7 and you are no longer in any way, shape, or form a private citizen. And it's not just when you're in your professional role, but when you're in your personal role. So going to open houses, going to parent-teacher conferences, I just have to make sure that I am very cognizant of what I do for a living, and I don't ever want to be at odds with one another.
I'll be very honest with you. I'm in a small community. Even when I go to the local grocery store, I make sure I'm like extra pleasant to everybody. I know that sounds so stupid when I check out. Thank you so much, because they know who I am.
Yeah.
Well, I can remember, and my mother, she was a teacher. She did not go into administration, but she would not buy beer in our town. And if she even went to another town to buy it, she would grab a paper bag and stick it in there. So you just have to, people are making judgments about you for the things you wouldn't even think of. They're watching you and they're making judgments. So you just need to be cognizant of that. And it is a little bit like you're a celebrity. I'm sure it's really bad for you, Dr. Caton, because I know where you live. And if you're a principal of a high school, you're a big celebrity there. So I'm sure it's even more difficult than being in a larger school system.
That is true. And so a lot to think about in this case study. The principal, this one centered on the principal's malpractice and the principal's behavior was kind of the core of this one. But so many lessons to be learned. But again, these case studies build in 2 weeks. We're going to do one on inclusion, but it touches pretty much everything. And we're going to focus on pretty much everything we've done. And again, our 2 resident experts will lead us through that in a couple of weeks, is because they're in the role. And a lot of the questions and a lot of the things that come up are day-to-day kind of things for people who are in the role, who can tell you, could have done this, should have done that, don't do this, do that, that kind of thing. That's what makes these case studies relevant and come alive. And I hope that you're getting the value from them that we intend for you to. We certainly enjoy your presentations. Great job tonight. All-star team tonight. Everybody did a great job. All right, we'll see you next week for our last class session, and then 2 weeks for our last case study. Everybody have a good week. We'll see you next week. Good night.